Welcome everyone to this Kenniscafé. Every month we invite scientists and researchers from Groningen to discuss current themes during this Kenniscafé. And in this month's edition we'll be talking about Meet the Dutch. Every September, Groningen welcomes thousands of new students. Some of them come from the Netherlands, but others are from outside of the Netherlands. And for internationals, the Netherlands can be a very confusing place. Because how does one eat a tompoes? Is it ever possible to really make Dutch friends? What is considered typically Dutch, and are those things really that special? We'll be talking about it with these guests tonight. In the middle is Joanna Duarte. She's a professor of educational sciences, and you're active in the fields of multilingualism and diversity. Next to me is Sven Gins. You're a cultural historian, a medievalist, actually, and with an expertise in the relationship between the Dutch and their animals. And on the end is Karen Prous. She's an operations manager of the International Welcome Center North, and you help newcomers find their way in Friesland, Drenthe, and in Groningen. And before we get started, I have a little integration exam for you. A few small questions, and if everything's working right, there will be a code, a website on the screen, Mentimeter, if you're familiar with that. This is another one. We're saving this for later. Yeah, on the top you can see menti.com, and if you go to that link, you can enter the code 14702525. And I'll give you a minute or so to find your way. And I believe that if you're in, you can immediately start voting. All right. Very divided. Okay.
Nobody deserves to be Dutch.
You have to imagine that normally you would be doing this in a closed little box, having no examples of other people. All right. We'll keep going until we have about 50, I think. We're getting some likes as well, thank you. And I want to ask my guests to keep your answer in mind, because we're going to come back to this. All right. Well, there's a clear favorite between the three answers. Is it possible to go to the next question already? How do the Dutch celebrate the birth of a child? With an orange tompoes, with an oliebol, or with beschuit met muisjes? Joanna, which is your favorite snack of these three?
I think the oliebol.
It's the right answer. All right, so we have one more question. Still not this one? Or do we just have two? Oh, there's just have two. All right. Can we see the answers? The right one is the middle. The majority had it right. And I want to ask you all the people who grew up in the Netherlands, can you raise your hands? And which of you had this one wrong? I see one very proud hand. Can I ask you, what was your answer? To me, that feels like the right answer as well. But still, the Dutch government wants you to follow an application training. As for the people who are not born in the Netherlands, can you raise your hand? All right, I think we're about 50-50 tonight, yeah. Which one of you had this one right? And who had it wrong? All right. What was your guys' answer? Does anyone want to share? What seemed logical? Someone else, right? All right, I agree. And the other question about the snack. Well, can the Dutch people who had this one wrong raise their hands? Right, as I suspected. And what about the non-Dutch people? Which one did you pick? Can I know? The tompoes. Yeah. Well, I kind of get it because we celebrated the king's birthday and we usually eat one of those. So kind of get the mix up. Thanks. Karen, you've been in the Netherlands for 28 years. Mm-hmm. Joanna, you were here for 8, and Sven, you were almost 10?
Yeah.
Almost 10. Did you get any one of these wrong?
No.
No. Well, you have a little preconceived knowledge, I think.
Yeah, I did all the exams for the integration course last year. So
Last year.
I don't remember those, actually, but others.
All right, thank you. So you all did pretty well. So we can say that you're pretty integrated after these 2 questions. Well, Karen, let's start with you. You help newcomers find their way in the Netherlands. You're operations manager of the International Welcome Center North. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us a little bit about what you do?
Sure. Maybe I should start with what the International Welcome Center North does.
Yes.
It is a one-stop shop for internationals living, working, or studying in the Northern Netherlands. And what we try to do is give them a soft landing, a place to go when they have questions, help them through all the formalities. The Dutch people are born with a BSN number, but people that move to the Netherlands have to get one. And if they come from outside of the EU, then they also have to have a residence permit. Both of those things can occur at our center. So it's a one-stop shop for that. And when they're done with all the formalities, they're relieved that they finally have documents so they can open a bank account and they can get their health insurance and they can pay their bills. But they still have a lot of questions about everything else. How does the healthcare system work? How does the OV chip card system work? Where can I find a particular product from my home country? From the very, very trivial to the very serious. We even had a case one time where someone's baby died, and we had to help them bring their baby back to their home country. So everything
Every
from
step
one
of the
thing
way.
and in between. So
Right.
we are an information center, we are a formality point, and we organize events and activities to help people get to know the Netherlands and Dutch people. So we want people to enjoy their stay here. We want them to help integrate. We have special integration programs like Fiets Friend, My Local Friend, Welcome Walks, Let's Talk Dutch, to really give them a feel of what it's like to live here and the tools to succeed.
Cool. So these questions at the beginning were kind of funny, and I don't think they're very necessary if you want to live in the Netherlands. But what are some big questions people come to you with? What are the most common problems?
A lot of it is about a driver's license.
Oh, really?
Can I drive here? How do I change my license if I need to? What are the rules of the road? Because some of them are quite different. Healthcare system, that's always a big question. Pets.
Right.
Where do I get a chip for my pet so I can import them? What are the rules there? Do they need to have collars? Do they need licenses? All sorts of practical questions, things about children, things about work. If one partner is coming for work, what is the other partner going to do? Where can I find work here?
You help them with that as well, right? You have
There's a program called Make It in the North that the Welcome Center helped start years ago, and now they've spun off into their own project. And they do a lot with helping to couple Dutch companies with people that are looking for work.
You told me when we were preparing this evening that some companies are a little hesitant and they might have some fears. What are the things they fear, and are they true?
A lot of things that they fear are just simply from unknown. They don't know how it works here. They don't know the customs. They don't know if what they don't know is going to hurt them. Some people don't want to live on the ground floor because in their country it's not safe to live on the ground floor.
Right.
So it really varies. It can be something very trivial to something very serious.
And what about the fears of the companies that are considering hiring internationals, what are the things they are afraid of?
They're afraid mostly is what is it going to do to my corporate culture? So if we've never had somebody that doesn't speak Dutch in our company before, and we hire someone that doesn't yet speak Dutch but will learn, what does that mean? How are my employees going to feel? What's that going to do to my corporate culture? Are we going to be able to be productive and innovative? And actually, research has shown that the more different people you have together from different cultures, the more innovative the company is and the more productive it is.
Right. This feels like a logical segue to you, Joanna, because your work's all about multilingualism and also diversity in schools, workplaces. Can you tell us a little bit more about it?
Yeah, sure. We are basically trying to address the issue or the question, why are we so afraid of diversity? Something that is so natural, all the centuries of borders changing and nation states changing, and we're still afraid of diversity. And I think now, more than 20 years ago or even 10 years ago, there are governments falling because of issues like migration. There are people that think that migrants are eating cats and dogs and something like that. I mean, why? Why are we so afraid of diversity? Why can we just not embrace it? And I don't answer this whole question. No. I look at linguistic and cultural diversity specifically, and I don't look at the whole of the society, but at schools, teachers, and how can we recognize, acknowledge, and value all of the languages and cultures of the pupils that daily come into kindergarten, into school, secondary education, and how can we help people see diversity as an asset and not as a challenge or a problem that you have to make invisible.
Because if I understood you correctly, in the preparation you told us that right now, if you're a child moving to the Netherlands, you don't know Dutch, the first thing they want you to do is to become fluent in Dutch.
Yes, it's called immersion. You have to be immersed in Dutch, but of course, it's only if you are a certain type of child, then you go to this what it's called reception classes, and it's between 1 year and 18 months, and then you are immersed in Dutch, and then finally you can move to mainstream education after, of course, being tested, because the Dutch education system is all about standardized testing in Dutch, obviously. But if you are another kind of child, then you might be placed on an international school. And then you're not a learner of the Dutch language, you're an international pupil. So all these labels, that's what we also look at, already send a kind of a message. What kind of citizen or what kind of opportunities are you going to get in the Dutch educational system has a lot to do with your background, with your languages, and with all the ideas associated with it.
And what does research tell us about multilingual classrooms or even workplaces, maybe?
Well, linguistic in terms of learning languages says that every language, and that also counts dialects, varieties, so Gronings and all this language is for the speakers of those language their main means of communication, of emotional affection, growing up, learning, making sense of the world, right? It's just when you go to educational institutions that there is a mismatch between maybe the language that you speak at home with your parents and the main language of schooling. And what Richard says is that so far there has been a kind of a blaming the victim narrative. So like, oh, these people don't want to integrate and learn our language. Whereas when we look at studies, it's more like schools are not knowing what to do. They want to make it invisible. They have like assimilation in mind, like just learn the language and forget your own language and culture, and that can be very detrimental to a child's development, well-being, sense of belonging also, and that it can lead to all sorts of polarization and identity problems in young adults, etc.
Is there an idea of what would be best, of what would be a better option than the current way we do it?
Yes, it's diversity-sensitive approaches, taking diversity, all of the diversity, also social-economic background, abilities, talents, neurodiversity, so really broad diversity. Take it as your starting point to develop your educational approach and not a wish to make diversity invisible and not hearable. So but it's difficult.
Do you feel that kind of forcing everyone to be the same is a typically Dutch thing, or is it an international problem?
No, it's something that many Western European societies have in common.
Right.
And it's something that developed only in the 18th century with the forming of nation states, because nation states suddenly had borders, and they had a governing body, and then they also thought, so we have one people, we have the borders, so we also have to have one unifying language,
right,
instead of all the languages of all these clans and people living here. And so once this idea was there of one people, one state, one language, it all became about standardizing and about putting to the periphery everybody that was multilingual and speaking strange local dialects. And this was not everywhere. So there are some countries that have this tradition and others less.
All right. Well, Sven, I saw you nodding enthusiastically at some of the things Joanna was saying about the 18th century and stuff. You're a historian. You're specialized in the relationship between animals and humans, which we'll come back to later. But I wanted to know from you, do you know anything more about the way Dutch, if they even existed in that shape at the time, but how did we welcome outsiders? Did we even welcome outsiders in the past?
That's a very good question. I would say that it's always been a rather difficult relationship, but I think in many ways we are still the same as we've always been. And I speak in a sort of general we, as in Western Europe.
I was just going to ask you, what is we? Because I forgot to tell you, but you are from Belgium. You're originally from Portugal, which you lived in Germany for a very long time. Yes. You're originally American. Yeah. So when you talk about we, what do you mean?
Then I'm thinking of the Netherlands,
right,
in the way back, in the Middle Ages. So at that point, Flanders would have been a part of the Netherlands. So you've got the Burgundians who were in charge of the territories, even parts of France as well. And in terms of trade, there was a lot of interest in bringing in knowledge from outside. One of the things that I'm studying in my research, for instance, is how sort of Islamic technology made its way to the Western Middle Ages in, let's say, the 13th century already. And then it was mostly something for entertainment, to entertain the rich people who were in charge, to show off their power, that they could bring in these exotic things from outside. But I think on a sort of day-to-day level, people would have been quite skeptical or careful with foreigners or outsiders. Right. But you didn't really have these national identities yet. So in terms of languages, it was also a lot more diverse. There wasn't really one way to speak Dutch. There were many different kinds of ways to speak it. So that also changes. I think identities were a lot more localized in that sense.
Right. When I think back of the history lessons I had in high school, we're talking about the golden century.
Was not golden in Portugal.
Nope. Well, I don't even know a lot about Portuguese history because I'm a Dutch person, so I only learned about the Dutch history, I'm afraid. Not a problem, maybe. But what I remember from my lessons is that, at least the book told me, that in Amsterdam were all these different kind of people with all colors and shapes and languages, and that we were always very tolerant and open. Is that right, or should I change what I think I know?
Well, this is the same period in which sort of the Cabinet of Curiosities also made its way into Dutch culture.
What are those?
And so these cabinets would collect interesting specimens, and that could be rocks, that could be dead animals, but it could also be people. Oh, God. So this is really the period of time in which Amsterdam, for instance, opened its first menagerie. So this was the first sort of zoo, if you will, where at the time at least non-human animals were put on display.
Right.
But it's not long after that they also started putting humans on display. So I would be cautious about that period.
So my memory of a lovely, diverse Amsterdam in the 17th century is not the right one.
Diverse.
It would be diverse, but is it accepting and
would everyone have been happy? That's another question, I think.
Well, multilingualism to the ages. We acquired lots of languages now. I don't know from the top of my head how many languages are spoken in the Netherlands, but I wanted to do a little poll about how many languages the audience speaks, and if you know more than Joanna, because she knows a lot. Who speaks 2? Who speaks 3? 4? I'm impressed, guys. 5? 3 left. 6? 7? I thought you'd win. Am I right? Did you win? No, there's one there. Yeah. Can I know what languages you speak? You want to share? What was the last one? Wow, impressive. Great. Which ones do you speak?
Well, Portuguese is my native language.
Right.
And then that always normally includes what we call portuñol, which is a mix between Spanish and Portuguese. But if you hear me speak and you don't know a lot of Spanish, you think, wow, this lady speaks really good Spanish, but it's kind of portuñol, but it allows me to do everything that I need. Then, of course, English, French, German, because I lived in Germany, Dutch now, and Frisian. And, of course, I understand Italian as well.
Frisian is such a funny one to me. And other
Why?
people... I am a Frisian. Disclaimer, I understand it. And I think it's really cool that you learn it. But there was this whole cool thing you did with knowing Frisian. I think we have a picture that could illustrate what you did.
Yeah, well... After not living in my hometown for 20 years, I decided it was time to get the Dutch nationality. I finally wanted a car in my name, and I wanted to vote, and I wanted... My son is 70, he's sitting here, so I'm trying not to embarrass him, but he's probably going to study in Groningen, and then I thought, I have to pay all these train tickets because of not having the Dutch nationality. So the disadvantages starting accumulating. I said, no, I'm going to do it. So I did the 5 exams with the weird questions, everything. I passed, and then I went there and I said, okay, I want to become Dutch. This is my file. My son will also become Dutch. Everyone will become Dutch. And then this lady said, you have to speak an oath. And
I
then
didn't even know this. Why do you have to speak an oath?
You have to speak an oath, yeah. And the only choice is whether you do it with a religious way or not.
All right.
And then, but they gave me a booklet, and the oath was translated in 8 languages. So I was like, I'm a multilingualism researcher. All the languages, and I'm like, where is Frisian? And this was in Leeuwarden, mind you. So I thought, I was flipping it around. I'm like, where is Frisian? And this lady that was very friendly said, Frisian? But you are applying for the Dutch nationality. I'm like, but Frisian is the second official language in the Netherlands, and in this province, 64% of the people speak it as a home language. No. And I said, well, I want to do my oath in Frisian. And then I decided, okay, do I bury the hatchet and forget it? But that's not my style. So obviously... There was a war open.
A war?
Yeah, I mean, I activated all my contacts, my husband, I got interviewed, everything. I was on the radio, and at a certain point, I'm like, okay, this is already being embarrassing. Let's
Too far
say the whole
now.
thing in Dutch, and that's it. Yeah, and then there was, people interviewing me and asking me, and until the last minute, it was not clear whether I could say my oath just and first in Frisian or in Dutch, or I had to say it in both languages, so it was kind of awkward. There were all these other people trying to become Dutch that started getting nervous, like, should I have learned this also in Frisian? Will I pass? Will I get my nationality? And at the end, I had to say it first in Dutch. I could say it especially in Frisian,
right,
with people taking pictures and everything, and then somebody asked questions about it, and then they decided that it was unconstitutional, that I had the right to say it first and only in Frisian, really, and not only in Frisian, but everywhere in the Netherlands. For official things where you need to say an oath, you're allowed to use Frisian and not Dutch.
Even in Limburg?
Even in Limburg. So, for example, I got on LinkedIn just a couple of months ago a message for somebody from the inspectorate of education, and when you become an inspector, official inspector, you need to say an oath. And she sent me a picture of how she was saying her oath in The Hague, in Frisian, like, this is possible thanks to you. And I'm like, I just wanted to annoy that lady, but it had some side effects. So.
I think it's so interesting that it took a Portuguese woman.
Weird, yeah.
Well, you opened the way. Thank you.
Yeah. I got 127 messages, apps and everything from people like, thank you for fighting for us. Yeah, first I was just like, I'm in a war path. This is a mission. This is my principle.
Right.
We're all multilingual. But then afterwards I'm like, people really thought, that this gesture meant something for their language, that they are being oppressed, and somehow not recognized, and that every little symbol counts. So.
Wow. That's fascinating.
Yeah.
In preparation of this evening, we talked about becoming a Dutch citizen. And for you, it obviously took some work and some effort.
And money and time.
All right, those as well.
And my principles, because some of the questions were really, in the exams, were really insulting in a way.
Do you have an example?
Well, for example, there's a little section about discrimination. And the information is actually you are never discriminated against because Dutch people are just direct. And if you feel attacked, it's because you are not being a good colleague. I mean, it's not this like in this wording, but after reading it twice, I'm like, okay, so it's my problem. And then, but if you still feel you're being discriminated, go to this and then discriminatiemeldepunt and then the address. And then there are questions about it. And I mean, you should answer like I first tried to speak to my colleagues and try to understand the issue, try to understand whether people were being direct. But another answer would be, no, I'm fed up and I'm going to make a complaint because I didn't think that this was an appropriate comment. So some of the comments are like gray. Some of the areas of asking questions also about like your neighbor is in the garden, she's wearing a bikini, what do you do? And I was like, get my own bikini. I don't know, but it's about like it's already assuming that I don't have my body in the same way as people in the Netherlands.
Or you might take offense or...
So the assumptions are my cultural background is so different that I need a whole bridge to cross this gap or something.
Karen, you've also taken the exam?
No, I became Dutch by the option procedure because I had lived here already for 15 years. And I sat there talking with a municipal representative in Dutch, arguing Dutch law about how I could do this. And she didn't know a certain answer at the end. I'm like, well, until you know, then I'm not going to do anything. So in the end, it was said, okay, no, there is this option procedure then. And it's basically just a decision of the mayor. So
really?
You apply after 15 years. It was a very special grandfather clause because I came here before you had to inburger. Before you had to do the civic integration. So I had already been here a while. So that's how I became Dutch. I still had to give the oath in Dutch because I don't speak Frisian yet. But no, so that was, and it was very moving, actually.
It was.
I was the last one. All the other people had come in through the naturalization procedure. So they all went before me, and then I was the very last one by the option procedure, and you stand up there and you have to swear your oath. And I was very, very moved. I didn't think I would be, but I really was.
Can you recall why?
I think because I appreciated the fact that I could become Dutch, that it was a choice that I was able to make, and a lot of people are not able to make that choice. So I felt very lucky.
I was just going to ask you, because with the International Welcome Center, do you also help people go through the inburger process or get citizenship?
They have a lot of questions about it. So if people live here for 5 years legally and continuously with a certain type of residence permit, then they can apply for Dutch citizen if they have completed all the inburgering, civic integration, and have gotten their diploma. So we get a lot of questions from people that want to stay here, that have come here for work. They've done their integration. They want to stay here. Their families are integrated here. They've learned the language. They've learned all their cultural things. And they just need to know the nuts and bolts about what they need to do, what the order is. So we try to demystify the process for them.
Is the experience Joanna had, do you hear that more often with the people you help?
Sorry?
the experience Joanna had, having offensive questions.
There's a lot of people that have come and have experienced some sort of discrimination.
Right.
So when they come in, they're a little hesitant. We're mostly all internationals at the center, including Dutch people, but I think we have 8 or 10 different nationalities that work there. So people feel a little bit more comfortable coming in and talking to us about sometimes some personal things.
Right.
Yeah.
Sven, you're from Belgium.
I can already hear the laughter.
Yeah, me too. Why is that? No, but are you considering citizenship? How is it for you? Because I feel, speaking as a Dutch person myself, I'm like, Belgium, pretty much the same. So, like, why would you go through the effort?
If only the Dutch government felt that way. Like, I would love to have like a Dutch nationality second, but I'm the only one of us who doesn't have the Dutch nationality yet. Because I wanted to adopt it when the elections were up, and I saw the polls, and I was like, oh no, I need to vote. But then I realized I would have to give up my Belgian nationality to get the Dutch nationality.
Is that a Belgian rule or a Dutch rule?
Belgium doesn't care. If I go or if I stay, that's all fine.
But you guys have two.
We're both married to Frisian and Dutch people, so we're not required to.
It didn't seem the most romantic reason to get married for me.
No.
It wasn't for you as well, right?
No, and I actually, well, my poor husband, I should say, is sitting there, but he was like the last of his friends because he didn't want to get married at all.
No.
So I was like, no, we will find another way, and no, never mind, and this is my principle, etc. And then one day he said like, oh, I mean, who cares? Let's just get married.
Right.
But I practically forced
a
Frisian guy that didn't want to get married to get married within the European Union. So only because I want to keep my Portuguese passport. I'm an only child. My parents are alive. My grandma, who turns tomorrow 101, is still alive. And there's nobody else. So if I don't have the Portuguese nationality, I cannot even like take care of the health stuff for my grandma. Everything is digital, like here. So, help my parents, have the bank account, have the BSN number from Portugal, all these kind of things that are basic. It's not only about identity. It's about everyday bureaucracy stuff.
So these practical things. You just said you can't own a. Can't you own a car? I never knew this.
I can own a car. I think so, at least. Oh. I don't have one.
A car in your name or something?
You have to have a Dutch driver's license, and then you can put the car in your name, or you have to have a special appointment and wait and blah blah blah, and then also so that then it's not immediate.
And are there other ways you are limited in not having a Dutch citizenship in your day-to-day?
Well, I once read this sort of very threatening bit on the website of the Dutch government that if I would become unemployed and I would file for sort of unemployment benefits, that the Dutch state would have the right to immediately send me back to Belgium. No matter how long I would have worked here, and I've now worked here for 6 years, I think. But they had the right to do so. Whether they would do so is another matter, and I think it's mainly something where a non-European person would probably get sent home. Whereas in my case, because we can travel freely as Europeans, I would just go back to Belgium and then come back the next year or maybe the next week to the Netherlands.
I never knew this. In talking to you guys in preparation for tonight, I kind of realized how privileged you are if you're Dutch. I never really had to think about any of these things, so this really opened my eyes. Thank you for that. Another topic I wanted to discuss tonight is what is typically Dutch. I already mentioned it in the intro, and this is where the Menti comes in, that you guys already saw. Because I wanted to ask you too, what do you think is typically Dutch? You can do it in your minds.
We are looking at it, right? Sending a tiki for 150.
That's typically Dutch.
If we're able to, casting a worrying glance to the people behind the screens. And otherwise, there's a microphone as well. Oh, never mind.
They were just waiting for something to appear.
Smoking weed in public. All right. I ate, oh no, boring food. Lots about food, guys. Hema. Being curious, that's a nice one, thanks. I wonder if that's a Dutch person who sent that in. Thinking you are tolerant. Digitalization, windmills. I'll keep reading this because they're getting smaller and smaller. I don't know if you can still read them. Wadden, frikandel, appointments, orange, belasting ontduiken. All right, tax evasion, directness, sharing the bill, birthday circle.
Yeah.
Oh, the dreaded birthday circle. Superficial small talk. Eierballen, Gronings. Nice guys. Greeting at the doctor. Do other nations... Thanks, guys. What do you guys associate with being typically Dutch? Maybe stereotypes or...
I think the directness is what most of the people that come into this center comment on. They're just not used to it. And I try to explain it to people that it's actually a form of being honest. And that I consider most Dutch people outside of politics pretty honest. So if they were to say something that was a lie in their eyes, then that wouldn't feel comfortable for them. So for me, I think that's one of the biggest things that I try and flip the perspective and show people that, okay, look at it instead of saying, do you like this book? And you say, oh, yes, I like this book. Thank you very much for the birthday present, and never reading it again. You get the receipt for the book, and you can exchange it.
Yep.
And the first time that happened to me, I was really affronted because you would never do that in American culture. You'd just be grateful and shut up that you got something and that was it. But this is practical. If you've read the book, or if it's not a type that you like, why shouldn't you have something that you like for your birthday?
I'd also want to add, in my experience, I think that feels more polite to me because I'm not forcing you to act like you've read the book. It's a form of respect almost, in my mind, being honest, but it might be hard to wrap your mind around it if you're not used to it. But for me, it's the other way around. I'm like, why would you lie? Why won't you say you don't like anything?
Difference in culture. You don't want to hurt someone's feelings.
Right.
That person went out, bought something for you that they thought that you would like.
Yeah.
And so you should be appreciative of that gesture. So it's a difference in culture.
Well, we already mentioned the tompoes. And Karen, I found a very funny video that I want to show to the audience. Oh.
Take off the top. Ooh.
It's not what you guys are supposed to see.
I'm going to eat them separately. Did I mention that it's messy? I like to take the top off, like this. Put the other piece on top. And then eat it with a fork. And that way you get everything in one bite.
Next level!
I just eat it and just go for it.
Oh.
I just take both sides. Since the glaze is my favorite, I just eat this one first. Get it over with. Save this for later.
I agree with your method. I think it's the best one. Mine is the fork. Yeah. But I like these stacking on top of each other.
Well, this came about. Our very talented and creative social media content creator came in with a bunch of tompoes one day, just sort of sprang it on us and said, we're going to make a little video about how you eat it. You want to do? And we're all like, okay, sure, why not? And that was the result. So it was great.
That's so funny. So you also help people with like less serious stuff.
Yes. Yes.
In the beginning, you also talked about fietsfriend, and that's also typically a thing we just saw on the screen. People wrote in cycling. What is? Because I feel like every year in September, I hear someone complain about internationals who can't ride bikes. So,
And sometimes that's true, and either they don't know how to ride bikes at all, so they learn through Fietsfriend Festival, or they don't know the rules of the road, because there are a lot of rules of the road of the Netherlands when you're riding a bike. And it's much more safe if you learn the rules of the road before you go out on the road to ride a bike. So our Fietsfriend Festivals has an actual class that we teach the rules of the road. Our very dedicated volunteers go out and run alongside people to teach them how to stay up on a bike. And we go out on the road when they can ride a bike, just to say, okay, we're going on an outing to show you. These are shark's teeth. That means you have to stop. This is a right-of-way road. This is the bike path, those sorts of things.
what are the motivations of people who cannot yet ride a bike to actually learn it?
Because it's the easiest way to get around in the Netherlands. So if you live slightly outside of the city center, it's either the bus or walking. And if it's too far to walk, and you don't have money for a bus because you're an international student, so you're not sponsored for OV, then you have to ride a bike.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
Wow, that feels very
Even
unkind.
if you are a European Union student, you're still not sponsored.
You have to work.
Yeah.
You don't have free
No.
public transit.
I applied for free public transport, and I only got it once I worked for a certain amount of hours per week.
Wow. Wow. Well, I feel like if we would introduce that rule for Dutch students, they would riot. Yeah. That's wild. I never knew that as well. Other typically Dutch things I feel like the Dutch are very proud of is their pragmatism and that we're very innovative. We build dikes and stuff. We are entrepreneurial. We're very, very tolerant. And this is, I think, where your expertise comes in. Because you also sent us a very funny video. Or funny, very funny and interesting.
Yeah. So one thing that's quite interesting about the Netherlands, and it has been this way for centuries, is that the Dutch are both very inventive, and they try to apply that for good for animals, but they can also be quite cruel or indifferent at the same time. And the funny example that I've brought for this evening is about Dutch ingenuity, something I discovered a couple of months ago, which apparently the world had already discovered long before me and even several other Dutch people. And it's called the fish doorbell. I've seen some of my students in the room, so they will know what's coming.
All right.
It's best seen and experienced.
There's an online fish doorbell that you can use to help fish in the Netherlands migrate upstream, and it's just gone live for the 2024 season. The live stream camera is located at a gate in a canal dam that's usually completely closed. In the spring, lots of fish try to swim upstream through the dam to lay their eggs. Previously, a dam lockkeeper would just open the gate every once in a while, which led to a lot of fish having to wait a long time at the dam. Predators started to catch on to this, so they would just wait around for fish crowds to form. But now you can press this doorbell for any fish who are waiting at the gate, since they don't have any hands to do it themselves. When you press the doorbell, it alerts the lockkeeper that there are fish waiting at the gate, and that way they can open the gate more quickly and save the fish from predators. The doorbell does ignore spam clickers, and it waits until a majority of viewers have clicked it to notify the lockkeeper. On the website, there's a spotter's guide so you know what kind of fish you're seeing, and new for this year, there's a live chat for viewers. I'm Jen, and I post something positive every day.
If I would have stumbled upon this video in the wilds, I never would have thought, oh, this is typically Dutch. So why do you think it is?
I've never seen anything like this elsewhere. And also, this is not the only case like this. Like, at the moment, the Dutch government is building on the Afsluitdijk a sort of big fish migration river as well. So they're expanding on this idea, which is from Utrecht. And even like with... You probably know the eco-ducts or the eco-viaducts or eco-aqueducts. The Netherlands wasn't the first country to implement them, but it already implemented hundreds of them within a year when they started in 2006, I think. They already had about 600 of these things after 1 year. And for such a small country, they really took the lead in that, in a sense, more so than any other country in the world.
So are we like really eco-friendly or...
In this sense, yes, but it is a bit more complicated.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. At the same time, for like the same way that this ingenuity is applied on a very big scale quite quickly, some of the sort of efficient innovations are also applied on big scales. And so ever since the Middle Ages already, the Netherlands has been very efficient at farming animals, at like increasing the scale of the amount of animals, but also taking good care of them because that is more lucrative, economically speaking.
All right.
And only in the last 2 centuries or so that has been expanded more with interest in the care for the animal itself. But still, even at the beginning of the 20th century, the Netherlands produced a lot more meat and milk than any other country in the neighborhood. And they also consumed a lot more than any of the neighboring countries. And that is still sort of the pattern. For a very small country, it does quite a lot in that sense.
So we kind of hold these two almost conflicting ideals in our mind, in our cultural mind, I guess.
Yeah. And you also see that in current discussions going on about the wolf, who finally made his way back after like 140 years of being extinct in the Netherlands. The wolf is finally back and here to stay, I imagine. But you see both sides of that really coming to the fore in the public debates about this. So, like, do we kill the wolves? Do we build a big wall to keep them all out of the Netherlands? Or do we try and embrace them and change ourselves? Yeah.
What was the last thing you said?
Or do we try to embrace the return of the wolf and accept that we need to change a little bit?
What do you think are the odds?
As far as I know, based on a recent study, it seems that Dutch society is moving towards the latter side. Not quite quickly, but slowly but surely. You see that there's a sort of transition in moving from the idea that we, and I speak about general we again, as our sort of a master of all the animals and the natural world, is moving towards the idea that we are a steward, we have to take care of them, and that itself is also moving to the idea that we are actually more of a partner of nature and the animals within it.
Right.
So that is slowly but surely catching on at the moment.
That sounds great. Yeah.
Yeah.
Another thing you mentioned is that we think we're very tolerant. It also just now stood on the screen, but we're actually not. And that makes me kind of sad, because I feel like Dutch people are like, yeah, we're the first ones to legalize gay marriage, but you told me that it isn't that great. And I think you guys agreed, Joanna especially agreed. What are your experiences on that? What are your views? Why aren't we as tolerant as we thought we were?
Well, I would say, mostly speaking from the perspective of sort of queer tolerance, the Netherlands has been a bit too proud of itself since the beginning of this century, because then they were really the guiding country, leading the way of becoming more inclusive. But that became so much a part of the national identity, I think, in a way, that it felt like, oh, but we are done now. We've done our part, and we are the leader. And now you see that actually countries like Belgium are catching up and even getting ahead of the Netherlands in terms of making people feel safe and really feel included. Whereas in the Netherlands, we are kind of following US discourse, I think, of sort of slipping back into all this woke nonsense.
Right. That's worrying and kind of sad. Joanna, you also agreed with the statement that we're not as tolerant as we think we are.
I also think it's, well, I'm not a historian, but I also think it's, especially not in the Dutch context, but if I look at this idea of this verzuiling, people were tolerant because everyone was in their own bubble. They had their own bakery, their own newspaper, blah, blah. So the tolerance was what the other people in the next dorp, in the next village, going to that church do. I don't care, because if they are respectful towards me, we are respectful towards them.
Right.
But when all of this fell down or was not that important anymore in our contemporary society, then people did have to deal with diversity, and then all kind of problems or conflicts of challenges arose. And I think we are still I mean, for example, sometimes I go to schools, and then there is like a formerly Catholic school and a public school, and they have to merge. And sometimes I go there and I think like, wow, there's a war going on. Like there's still 2 offices, and yes, what they do is on that side of the building. I'm like, but I thought it was one school. And I'm like, how can there be such animosities in terms of merging for the good of the education of the children?
And
that are still ingrained somewhere.
Yeah, you're talking about 2 Dutch groups mixing, but how is that for non-Dutch people?
Yeah, but no, there's like traditions to be kept, and
Right.
so there's, you think you come from outside and you think I'm going to visit that one school, but then there's like 2 people I have to talk to, 2 groups, 2 cultures, and and sometimes they're also like, because that school is like the zwarte school.
Oh, God.
So that I'm like, oh my God, what is going on here? So you think it's very tolerant and it's very open, but then when you really are in there every day and you have conversations, then you still think in their minds there's still like shackles and there's still like divisions. And sometimes I think people are getting more and more suspicious about the other and are othering others. So,
Karen, have you experienced this, or do the people you help experience this?
People we help definitely experience less tolerance than they would like to see, perhaps. Right. And I think it's mostly due to the fact that as long as whatever one group is will accept another group, as long as it doesn't influence that one group. So if that group has to change, then that's when it starts being a problem.
Right.
So, you can exist over there. Like that other part of the school can exist. And we have our school over here. And it's fine. We accept you over there.
Don't want to see it.
But don't mix them. So I think that's an issue here. You see that in housing. You see advertisements for student housing. No internationals.
Yeah.
Because they don't want to.
Right.
For whatever reason. They think, okay, this is what we know, this is what we want to keep to, and that's an unknown, and it's scary, therefore. So we don't want to be scared, so you just stay there and we'll stay here.
Right.
Yeah. Just one other example. For example, I just mentioned these reception classes.
Yeah.
So when children come from abroad, I mean, not the internationals, whatever you want to define it, but other children come from abroad. They go to a place and they have their own school. And that is another example of this compartmentalization and the need to have like homogeneous groups, right? We don't know this in Portugal. When you enter the school system, you immediately go to mainstream education, and there are all kinds of professionals that help you within the mainstream setting. So when I tell my colleagues that stayed in Portugal and did the teacher education program with me 100 years ago, they're like, but that's illegal, because in the Constitution it says you shouldn't separate people by, color, language, blah, blah, blah. And that is literally and physically separating people. And I'm like, but they are used to this system and they think that it's amazing. And it's really almost impossible to explain that there are other ways that are much more inclusive to, integrate people from day one and make them feel welcome in the mainstream. Because imagine you're a child, you are from the Ukraine or whatever, and then you are only going to stay at that school for maybe a year or 18 months. So are you going to make friends? Are you going to invest it? Or is it much better for you to say, okay, this is my school for the upcoming 5 or 6 years. I'll make my friends here.
And I imagine it has a lasting effect on those kids.
Yeah.
But you're trying to change this, right?
Don't put
Not
the pressure on me,
but
at least we're trying to speak with professionals. And I've seen a lot of these reception schools that are really good, really high quality. So it's not about the form itself. It's about mindsets also and how you see the children as well. Right. But I think if you want to say we are doing inclusive education and we are offering equal educational opportunities for children, then this compartmentalization, filtering, and trying to get homogeneous groups at all costs is something that really needs to go away. Because then you're not embracing diversity, you're just filtering groups and diminishing educational opportunities.
Right.
And it can even occur in very small and subtle ways. We're inside a municipality building, our center, and there's a main reception at the building. And anybody that comes to that main reception at the building that doesn't speak Dutch, regardless of why they are there, they send them automatically to our center.
Really? So you see all types of problems people...
Yep. We had one of my colleagues had a group of 20 asylum seekers get sent to our center because they wanted to speak to the mayor, and the person at the reception didn't want to deal with them.
Wow.
So they said, okay, foreign, go there.
Wow.
So we're already sort of compartmentalized into international, anything not Dutch.
Is the municipality open to changing this, or do you feel like it's very set in stone?
I think it's just what I said about before. It's like, okay, that belongs there, so it has to go there. So it's more just a mindset, I think, which obviously can be changed.
Right. Well, at the end of this evening, I really want to send the people home with some advice. As internationals now, Dutch citizens, or living here for a long time, what would be a useful tip for people moving here in your experience? What has helped you?
Well, I think the best thing to do is to do your homework before you come. Read up a little bit on the culture. Every culture has its own dimensions. Realize what your own culture is and what the Dutch culture is, and where you might fall on the 7 dimensions that there have been talked about in research of culture. So realize that, okay, the Dutch are very high in individualism. Where does your culture fall? Now, everybody is an individual within their own culture, but still, if you realize, okay, I come from more of a group-oriented culture, and here it's very individualistic, then think about how might that affect my interactions with Dutch people.
Right.
So do a little bit more homework before you come.
What was it for you guys?
Well, for me, it was definitely learn the language, because I had to learn Dutch and Frisian as soon as possible. And even when Dutch people talk back to you in English, which they constantly do, if you have an accent, stay on it, don't give up, and don't be like offended. Like, oh, my Dutch is not good enough, I have an accent, so that's why they answer. Just go on with it. After 3 weeks, it goes away, and then you can really learn, listen, just be a part of things. Even if some things you still think from your own cultural perspective, they are a little bit awkward, like that everybody always has a meaning in an opinion in a meeting, for example, and that they can go for hours and hours and hours, and you don't really know who is going to take the decision, like where's the hierarchy, who is taking the decision.
Right.
I mean, now I know it after 8 years, but at the beginning, even after understanding what was being said verbally in Dutch, I was still like, who is going to put order in this chaos at a meeting? So, but through learning the language, you get the cultural cues much quicker.
You also said in the preparation for tonight that you have to keep explaining, and that it's not just, of course, it gets annoying, but it helps to explain yourself. Do I remember this correctly, or?
Yeah, but you mean?
I thought you said to me, like, when I misunderstand something, or if I want to do something for my own culture, I just explain it to them, tell them what I'm doing and why I'm doing it.
Sometimes you don't have the words, or it's not a word, it's a concept that you want to use, or a metaphor. And then I'm like, okay, I'll just say it in a Dutch translation of what I would say in Portugal. Normally people look at me like really weird, and then it becomes like 30 seconds of distraction. For example, in June in Portugal, we eat a lot of sardines. And then we have a lot of metaphors. Like, for example, if you want to get your issue across and you want to go past other colleagues, then you say you want to put your sardine in the best place in the grill. And then I'm thinking, like, how can I find a nice expression in Dutch to do it? And I can't. And then I'm like, no, you are putting your sardine in the grill. And then people are like, what? And then it kind of becomes a distraction. Then I explain it, and then we go back to the topic.
And a way for them to learn a little bit more about your culture.
Yeah, and also sometimes to get away of all these to-do lists and all these agendas and stuff. I don't do it that often. Very pragmatic, efficient. I don't do it that often, and I didn't do it in the beginning. I said, like, just try to be like the others, etc. But now I'm like, my sardines are nice. I can say something about it.
That's great. So learn a language, but keep a little bit of yourself in
exactly.
there. Sven, do you have any useful tips?
Yeah, I would also say, like, hold on to your home language. Even in my case, Flemish, I've noticed that a lot of Dutch people love hearing, how do you say things in Flemish? Because, like, for instance, the word voormiddag, in Flanders, we use that as, like, everything before noon. But that got me into a lot of confusion.
Morning?
Like the whole morning, anything before noon, so voor de middag. Yeah, but also like anytime between 6 and 12. But when I told friends, like, let's meet in the voormiddag, they were like, oh, that would be in het voren van de middag. So like at 1 or 2 p.m.
Or 2? That's what
That was very confusing. But that is also quite fun, like getting into these sort of confusing things, even though you speak sort of the same language. But I would say that my advice would be something that at least I really benefited from is embracing the directness as sort of an opportunity to become more assertive. Back in Flanders, we, at least in my experience, we are a bit more passive-aggressive or sort of shy about things.
Yeah.
And it always kind of irked me. But here in the Netherlands, I really got to experience that you can say what you think and what you feel. And maybe you'll get a quite direct response to that. But in general, everyone appreciates just being honest, as you mentioned earlier. So you can really get somewhere and you don't need to sit on your grievances or on your issues. People are always up for debating things and then finding compromises.
You can say in Portuguese, you slap someone in the face with a sardine. So that's what you say.
Before we get to the audience questions, because I think they'll have some, I think what would be even more useful is some tips for the Dutch people. How can we accommodate or help or welcome people who are new here?
If you have an international colleague, consider inviting them up to your home after 5.
Oh.
Because you're very collegiate during the day, you're very kind, but at 5 o'clock you go home to your families and friends. And the international, if they've just arrived, they maybe don't have that. So it can be quite lonely. So even just a gesture for saying, oh, why don't you come over for coffee or cake or whatever would really be appreciated. And it would start to break down the barriers, I think, between the Dutch and the internationals after 5 o'clock at night.
The magic 5 o'clock. Well, that would be very useful. Thanks.
Yeah.
Do you have a tip?
Maybe being careful with being very direct immediately with internationals.
So, like, where is the boundary? I don't know where to...
Or at least explain, like translate, like, oh, I didn't mean it like that. Or, oh, I just meant it something. If you feel that the eyes are like in shock, do something about it.
Okay.
Yeah.
What about you?
I would say be genuinely curious about your sort of international colleagues or your international friends, but don't exoticize them as like a kind of different species visiting you. Because sometimes it can feel that way for internationals, like, oh, you're like this little monkey from elsewhere, and how does your culture do things? Like, you can be genuinely curious while recognizing the common humanity that all of us share.
Right.
So that's something I would advise.
Very wise advice. Thank you so much. Are there some questions from the audience? There is a mic. Yes, there's a box coming to you, and there's a little round thing on top. If you could talk into that.
Thank you. I have a question to you, Joanna. You mentioned diversity in corporate cultures, and you embrace that. Do you think a company can be so over-diverse that it loses that thing that glues it together and makes it or creates that company culture?
Well, in literature, that's called super diversity. So when it's like hyper forms of diversity in terms of age, in terms of socioeconomic background, languages, cultures, etc. And according to sociologists, that can cause something that it's called the hunker down effect. Like people are getting so many different informations or conflicting informations, or they don't know how to react to that they just hunker down. And we see it in society as well. People get afraid, suspicious, etc. I just think that companies that are open, well, actually I know from research at college companies and schools, organizations that are open to diversity, even to super diverse forms of collaboration, that they also they have a diversity aware policy, they have a diversity management, they have, right? So there are many things you can do to welcome all of these diversities. If you don't do anything and you expect assimilation or things just to work out, then if the company grows, it will eventually become a problem, probably, right? Yeah.
Karen, do you have anything to add to that if you work with corporations?
Well, beyond what that you said, I think it's also important to realize that it will develop its own culture.
Yeah.
So it will take a little piece of everything and form a slightly new culture. And that's not necessarily bad, because things do evolve over time. That's how all our cultures have grown over the years. And sometimes there's just an acceleration to that growth.
Thank you. Thank you for your question. Are there any others? Yes,
Oh my
all
God.
the way in the back. You can throw it. Yes. Thanks.
Well, it's more like a statement that I've wondered because when the Dutch go to different countries, I really noticed that compared to a lot of other cultures, the Dutch are quite good at being assimilating in those other countries. Like I lived in Australia for a very long time, and I had no Dutch friends. Whereas I looked at other cultures, they all kind of clinched together, and of kind of where that sort of comes from.
Maybe one step back. Do you agree with the statement?
I think it depends on the size of the group also, and also on what you said, the degree of individualism, collectivism,
and perhaps the reasons why you went abroad. That might also say, and the type of person that does go abroad might be inherently more open to trying to assimilate and learn things from the new culture. So that's maybe something that the Dutch have done very well throughout history in all their traveling and sailing throughout all the different countries of the world. So I think historically that's probably true. They are very good at fitting in for a little while.
Yeah. Might that cause the irritation some Dutch might feel when they see non-Dutch people not integrating the way they would? I'm just hypothesizing here, but if we see ourselves as easily integrating people, as people who easily get along with new cultures, when we see people not doing the same, we might think, oh, I can do it. Why can't they? Or
I think that's again where the Netherlands falls on the cultural dimension scales. So it's a fairly assertive, fairly individualistic culture. Yes, everybody discusses everything. It's a consensus-driven culture, and I think that culture probably can integrate fairly well. Other cultures have a completely different profile on those dimensions. So it'd be much more difficult then to integrate in a very individualistic, direct, outspoken society.
right.
I also think that if you integrate in an Anglo-Saxonic culture or a Western culture, it's different than if Dutch people would move to Portugal tomorrow. I wonder how many of them would participate in a meeting in Portuguese within a month if you don't know the language before, right? So it also depends on where Dutch people settle. And for example, Dutch people that live in Portugal, they have their own community.
Yeah.
And they meet with each other a lot.
Yeah.
So also like German people or people from the UK that live in the south of Portugal and
only little colonies, right?
And only a small minority does actually learn the language, which is something that is asked of us when we come here.
Yes.
And I would also say that it also depends on how welcoming and active the local community is in helping people integrate, because we often talk about this as sort of a one-way thing where the outsider has to integrate, but the culture where they are trying to integrate can really help them do so. So I think maybe there can be an assumption among the Dutch that since they adjust so easily, everyone else can do so too. But that should not keep them from trying to help people to integrate, because many people do want to, but just don't know how, for instance.
Thanks. No. Are there any other questions or statements? I see one in the middle there. You can throw it.
Hi.
Hi.
So it's a question for all of you, really. One thing I did notice with the Dutch is that you're quite proud of where you are, quite parochial as well. So
what's that word you said?
Parochial, like proud of like your city,
right?
And like kind of shitting on the others as well. Like, especially with my partner, he just cannot set foot in Amsterdam.
Oh.
But like, I wanted to know whether the panel think that there's like a major difference in how the North-South divide handles integration and diversity.
Great question, I think. Does anyone have a response?
My husband is from the southern part of the Netherlands, from Nijmegen, and that's quite a difference from here in Groningen. So I met him, of course. I assumed all Dutch people were like he was, and then I came to Groningen. And I found out that's really not true. And then I found out the Frisians are different. And then I found out the Drenthe people are different. So every place, almost every little village, is slightly different than another place. So I think there are differences even within a small country. Traditionally, maybe because they didn't move very far. Traditionally, maybe because people stay fairly close to their families. I don't know. But,
the person who asked this question, can I know where you're from?
Hey, in New Zealand.
All right, so 2. Is that different? Because you mentioned, I feel like it's parochial. I think you just explained what that is. But it sounds to me like that would be the case everywhere. As a Dutch person who hasn't traveled a lot, I'm like, of course, every village is like parochial in a sense. Is it different in your experience?
Not in the UK, it's exactly the same. But in New Zealand, it's kind of all focused on Auckland. The hate's just for Auckland. Everywhere else is lovely.
All right, thanks. Are there any other questions? I don't think there are. Well, I think that will be... Are there any closing statements from you guys?
Well, just on that question, I do have the feeling that where in the Netherlands this more Catholic tradition in the south and the more Calvinistic in the north, but probably you know better where exactly the how, etc., that you really feel like the tradition, celebrating Carnival, etc., but also how interpersonal relationships, you don't want to pinpoint it and say, oh, in the north they're like this, in the south, but you do feel it when you work with different people. And like I feel much more connected to the people in Limburg because they make more noise, and every time they're there, there's like a lot of cake and a lot of people talking at the same time. I'm like, oh, I can kind of feel at home or something.
I grew up in Friesland, and I've lived in Groningen for 10 years. My partner is from Drenthe, so I kind of feel like a northerner in a way. And every time we drive past Zwolle, we're like, doesn't feel quite the same. I want to go back. So I think the divide between north and south is definitely there. Yeah, and you're like from the extreme south in a way.
Yeah, and we have that as well. Like in Flanders, every province shits on the other provinces.
Right.
And the West Flemish people always need subtitles. The people from Flemish Limburg are slower than the others. People from Antwerp are super arrogant, so they're like our Randstad.
Yeah.
We have all those stereotypes as well.
This might be a good closing statement, but I remember from talking to you, you mentioned something about that, help me, it was about cats and that they're all different, but not the thing they're all different is that they're the same or something. There was like this really cool quote, but I'm forgetting it now, so that might be a bad way to end this. But
I have no idea. I think...
Diversity in cats.
I think I said that you can compare people from different nationalities to like cats, that you can make these generalizing statements, but everyone who's ever owned a cat knows that they are super unique and super typical personalities. You would never deign to generalize your own cat as like, this is how all cats are.
I think the thing you said was, the thing they all have in common is that they're very different.
I guess so. That sounds very quotable.
Yeah, that's why I tried to quote it. Well, thank you so much, and thank you for your questions, and let's give our panel a warm applause. Thank you. Thank you. And if you want to come up and speak to one of the panel members some more, you're very welcome to. You can also get a drink in the Kenniscafé. That's on the 4th floor? Somewhere up in the forum. 5th, thanks. You're very welcome there to have a drink. And if you want to visit one of the other Kenniscafés, you can go to our website. This is the one on the 10th of October. It's electrifying, about the electrification of Groningen. You can find all this and more on the website, sggroningen.com. And you're very welcome, .nl, I have to say. And you're very welcome to another one of the editions. Thank you. Have a great night.
Thank you.